Hi chickens, thank you for checking out this episode of Rambling Witch. I'm going to be doing a lot of rambling about spellcraft today, so I'm going to need to wet my whistle, and I've got some assam on the go, so it's all good chickens. Hopefully you've got something in your cup as well. Let me know in the comments what it is. So obviously right off the bat, I'm not trying to be dogmatic. I'm not trying to tell anybody how they should conduct spellcraft, what kinds of things they should or should not be doing. I'm not trying to talk about things in any kind of general or universal way or say that all witches are the same. I'm just going to be talking about some things that have worked for me, some things that I've had to mull over or reassess, and just really talking about where I am now with the whole concept of spellcraft. To me, when I think about spellcraft that I practice, I'm thinking about a spectrum of things, from very quick and dirty kind of like manifestation work that I do in the moment, that I am trying to call to me in that moment, or you know, really sort of wanting things to come to me that are going to play out in the coming days, and there is no scripted spell for that necessarily. It's not planned. It's not something where I worry overly about the correspondences or what phase of the moon it is. It's what I think of as quick and dirty spellcraft essentially, and then we've got the much more scripted stuff which is planned out, which includes a lot of different correspondences or props or tools or ingredients, etc., and it is kind of you know, more strategized, if you will. I don't think of one kind of spellcraft as being necessarily more potent or more valuable than another, but I definitely do think that there are advantages to either end of that spectrum, and obviously with it being a spectrum, there is a very nice sort of bunch of space in the middle where I tend to dance around. I also want to say for the record that I don't necessarily think of ritual and magic as being interchangeable. I definitely think ritual can be a part of performing a spell working, but I don't think of ritual as being a spell working necessarily. I do think that there is, as I mentioned in the last video that I made, it's kind of like a bit of an obsession with me at the moment, I suppose, but there's a Venn diagram and there's a space in the middle where ritual and magic overlap, but I don't think of them as being the same. I think of ritual as being a confirmation of something that has happened to me, or that I've decided upon, or that I wish to acknowledge, or that I wish to forge a closer connection with, whereas I think of spellcraft being much more specifically the calling in of something that I desire. I actually want to make a change, and I want to put my energy and my intention into that change, and I will that to become a variable in the change coming into being. So I feel like those two are different. I think ritual does cause change. It is alchemical, but not in the same way that a spell is intended to be alchemical, and I hope that makes sense. I think that would probably make sense to most people. So I would say that on average I don't do a large amount of spellcraft for a witch. I mean, I guess there's been no study done on this, I don't think. It's not like someone's gone out there and said this is an average amount of spellcraft that somebody identifying as a witch would do. And there is the argument about whether or not witchcraft really does need to involve spellcraft. You know, there have been some discussions about that, there has been some discourse about that. So I would say that for me though, spellcraft is not a huge part of what I do in my witchcraft journey. It is certainly something that I do and have done since I cast my first spell when I was 13 years old, 12 or 13 years old, and it was a spell that I did with a couple of other girls, and that was God, so long ago now. I'm 34 now. So I've been aware of spellcraft and practicing with spellcraft on and off for a very long time, but I would definitely say that it is not something that I do super regularly. It's not the bulk of my practice. It's actually not where I have the keenest possible interest, but when I do it, I like to do it in a way that is beneficial for me in terms of going on to do more in the future in a more practiced way. So for instance, that's a really like fiddly way of saying it. So let me just say that when I perform a spell, I do like to keep a record of what I've done. I do like to keep a record of what the steps of the spell actually were, the ingredients or props or whatever that I used, and if I did write anything down, I keep it in terms of words that I would use. I do keep it and I put it into the record that I have of the spell. Sometimes I do choose to speak spontaneously during spellcraft, and obviously then I can't write those words down, but I might sometimes write the basic gist of what I did during the spell. I have definitely had times where I haven't recorded everything that I've done in spells, and I've had some, you know, of the quick and dirty spells that I didn't record necessarily. I feel like that's more an organic sort of, it's like a spur of the moment thing where I feel like I've got the power, I've got the will, I've got the energy, and it seems like the time, and so I just do something. And it will be, you know, there'll be a lot of spontaneity to it. I don't often write those things down. And I haven't had a perfect record of record keeping as a witch. So I definitely want to stress that. It's not like I'm perfect at it, but I do try insofar as possible to make a note of what I did so that I can see whether or not it came to pass as I wanted it to. And if I want to re-perform the spell, if I want to cast again for the same thing in the future, how can I tweak? How can I change things? Do I want to do a completely different kind of spellcraft? Do I want to design something totally different, tap into a different paradigm with spellcraft, or do I want to do the same kind of thing I did last time but with some tweaks and some changes? And I also would say that I don't necessarily think that when you cast a spell it either works out or it doesn't work out. I feel like there is a spectrum there as well. So it definitely seems like spectrums are another one of my obsessions right now. Spectrums and Venn diagrams, darling, everywhere. Stick it on my merch, would you? So yeah, I think there's a spectrum there as well. It's not a case of the spell did work or the spell didn't work. I feel like spells can work in degrees. I feel like sometimes there is a specific aspect of what you wanted and what you cast for that you will receive, but you won't necessarily receive perhaps another aspect of what you wanted or what you cast for. I think sometimes you will cast for something and it will come to you, but it will not necessarily come to you within the desired time frame that you had in mind, or it will come in a slightly different fashion or a slightly different package, let's say, to the one that you envisioned and that you cast for. I don't see that as a failure of the spell to work. I just see it as an interesting dance with other variables outside of my control. So it's the nature of being a co-creator. It's the nature of knowing that you have your will, your intention, your ability, your power, but so does everybody else and so does the universe. And so it's almost like that negotiation process. And I don't necessarily think that just because a spell materializes in a way that wasn't exactly what I put in the brochure means that it's failed. I wouldn't say that. But I am interested in when a spell does fail, when I feel like it didn't materialize, and I want to know what I might do differently next time, or to just remember what I did in the first place. So I wanted to talk about quite a few things in this video, which is why I made it into a rambling witch video. The first thing I wanted to talk about is getting ideas for spells. First of all, there are obviously lots of tried and tested ways to perform spells. When it comes to spellcraft, there are a number of different ways to skin a cat, and for a committed vegan, that's a weird saying to use, but it just came out, okay? There's a number of ways to skin a toy cat. Even that's horrible. There are tried and tested methods like candle magic and sigil magic, you know, different forms of magic that people use. And there's also combinations of different forms of magic that you can use. And I think that there are lots of people that are kind of combining different things that they learn about and doing their own thing, just kind of creating something that has a number of different elements in it of other magical paradigms, pre-existing paradigms, popular paradigms, but also kind of putting their own stuff in there as well. I like knowing that I have the benefit of these pre-existing ideas, these forms of magic that are already there and that I've learned along the way. And I like the idea that I can combine different things. So I might choose to put a candle in my working and actually perform candle magic, but also utilize certain herbs or utilize a spell tincture or potion that's been made for me. I might choose to use sigil magic in a working whilst also at the same time using cord magic or incorporating crystals or doing tarot magic. Like, I might do a number of different things. It doesn't have to be one particular form of magic that I'm doing. I can like chop and change and enjoy sort of mixing things up a little bit. I also feel like I've taken certain things and developed them a great deal. So I haven't just, you know, read about candle magic and performed it. I've also put my own flair into it. And I think a lot of people that watch my channel that perform spellcraft have similar kinds of experiences where they come across these pre-existing magical ideas and learn what they can about them, and then, you know, put their own personality in, put their own flair into that magical process along the way as well. And I feel like with things like art magic, for example, I have definitely formed my own ideas. I've thought lately about wanting to maybe write something about this at some point, because I feel like I've really like gone off the beaten track, and I'm sure that there's a lot of overlap with things other people have been doing that maybe aren't out there, and there are people that do things similar to what I do, but I would love to be able to write down a bunch of the things that I do anyway. And in my Neon Witch video series, if there are any Neon Witch alumni watching, you will know that I do have certain ideas to do with art magic that I really enjoy, and that some of which I've posited to you. So, you know, I definitely think there's some ways where I've gone way off the beaten track, and other ways where I've just added my own little flair or my own little things, or over time I've learned what tends to work better and what doesn't. And that will be sort of my own little take on things. And it's not like I've gone so far off the beaten track, but I've gone far enough where I feel like it's something that I feel comfortable with, and it's something that I feel like is effectual for me because I've put my mark on it, kind of thing. And I suppose one thing I wanted to talk about was looking for ideas online or in books. So looking for ideas for actual words for the incantation, for the spell, you know, the phraseology that you're using, the lines that you're going to be saying, if indeed you're going to be talking at all, because you don't have to. There doesn't have to be any speaking aloud in a spell. Indeed, you can sing in a spell, or you can be totally silent. You can write in a spell but not speak. So during the performance of a spell, you definitely don't have to be speaking. But for me, I find that to be very powerful. I'm a very sort of like throat chakra oriented person, as I'm sure you may have noticed, you know, along the way, darling, if you've been here a while. So I do like speaking, and I know that a lot of other people do like to have a written incantation, something that they can say, words that they can actually voice during the spell. A lot of people go online or look through books or whatever to find different ideas of things that they can say in their spellcraft. And I think one thing it's important to recognise is that you can notice what you enjoy about other people's incantations, the way that other people approach it, etc., while still making it your own and not feeling like you have to force yourself into doing anything that feels uncomfortable and therefore not powerful. If it feels awkward, if it feels weird, if it feels uncomfortable, if it feels like it's not you and you're not really vibing with it, then it is straight up not powerful. I don't give a fuck which way you cut it. I don't care what anyone says. That is my deep belief, that it is not powerful if it doesn't feel fizzy for you. You know, and that's why I don't say, and have never said, so mote it be, because it doesn't sound right to me. It sounds like I'm trying to pretend that I'm like from the time of the witch hunts or something. It just doesn't vibe with me. If it vibes with you, fine, no judgment whatsoever. This isn't about judgment. It's about really allowing myself to bring my authenticity to the party. And if I can't do that, then what is the good of performing the spell when already I'm really on the back foot? I'm on the losing end already, because I haven't connected with what makes me feel powerful and what will therefore give power and credence to the spell itself. So for me, when I first started really getting serious about wanting to make things happen using spellcraft, I thought a lot about the kind of poetry that I find really powerful, the kind of quotations that I find really powerful, what kinds of words make me feel incredibly fizzy and ready to do something. And I would take that kind of writing, that style, that type of phraseology, and just like sort of mash it up and mix it together and make my own special mints, if you will. And that's something that I think has really improved my ability to do effective spellcraft, is really just making sure that I sign off on it by figuring out on a scale of on a scale of totally flat to fizzy as all fuck, where am I, you know. And if I'm on the flat side, why would I put that in a spell? Why would I? Why would you? Why would anyone, damn it? I mentioned a little bit earlier about scripted versus spontaneous spellcraft. So I mentioned that I don't always have a plan and like a layout of what I'm going to do. Sometimes it's just quick and dirty. I feel like I just put it right out there, and I might not even be at my altar. I might go and hit my knees and light my working candle and then just do something very spontaneous, bring the stuff together that I need in my mind, my heart, my energy. It might be when I'm not even at home. I've done a spell from my bed before because my back injury was so bad. I did it lying on my side, you know, it was just a very spontaneous, it was like a surge of power and determination that I felt could be very transferable into an effective spell that would manifest. So, you know, I wanted to sort of mention that your mileage is going to vary on where you are with that. Some people are very much about scripting spellcraft. And for a lot of people, it's a case of feeling like they want to respect the whole process of spellcraft and the idea of what spellcraft is. And I think that's a shame, because I don't think people should consider quick and dirty, non-scripted, spontaneous spellcraft to be disrespectful or lesser than. It really depends when your power comes to you and how you feel that you are a most effective magical practitioner. And if you find that when you script something and you plan something and you go over every detail with a fine-tooth comb, if you find that it loses its potency for you to do that, then again, don't do it. If you feel like it's better to just be like, it's now, the moment is now, I am potent, I'm going to do it now or not at all, then obviously you are more of a spontaneous witchy being than a scripted witchy being. And, you know, it's nice to be able to dance all over that spectrum and to know that sometimes different things call for different, you know, are called for in different scenarios. I definitely think it's a really good idea to sort of figure out where your power comes from on the spectrum of scripted and spontaneous. And I would also say that even when a spell that I write is very much scripted, so I've literally sat there and I've been like, okay, this is the order of business for what's going to happen. I'm going to open sacred space and then ... XYZ. Even when I do that, I really want to stress to you that I still, in my mind, in the back of my mind, I'm always leaving room for something unscripted to happen. And this is something that I talk about with my clients, not necessarily when it comes to spellcraft per se, but actually when it comes to their lives. If they're wanting to be super productive or very prolific, or they've got lots of plans and they want to strategize for doing more and whatnot, I always say, you know what, don't make it so rigid and so tight that there's no chance for anything unscripted to happen at any point in the day or the week or the month or whatever it might be. And I think that's very important in the spellcraft practice as well. I need to make sure that I'm not getting so concerned and consumed with what my ego thinks is going to be the best thing for the spell that I forget that sometimes the ego has a very definite sense of what needs to happen and what would be best for me as an individual and what I can envision and what I need to do to make that so. But that doesn't mean that the ego has an awareness of what might be on the periphery that might want to come in once I'm in that sacred space. So I need to be aware of the fact that there's a lot of things that I don't know about or understand about the situation, and I need to be able to allow unscripted things to come in. So just for instance, if you're kind of getting confused about what I mean here, let's say that I'm in sacred space and I'm going through the order of business, which is written out in my book of shadows, and I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm going through it now, and suddenly I just have this deep urge to call in my matron deity, or I have this feeling that there is something that needs to be channeled and I need to write it down, or I feel like saying certain words or calling out for something, calling something in, and that's not in the script, that's not something that I wrote down as something I was intending to do. Of course I'm going to allow myself to do it. Of course I'm going to let myself feel into what is needed and let myself do that. And I think it's always worth like having a chat with yourself about whether or not you are on rails too much of the time with what you're planning on doing in terms of spellcraft, and whether or not it's possible that you need to loosen up and just let things come in more organically. Along the way, people have asked me, how do I know when it's the right time to do a spell? How do you figure out when it's the right time for you to do a spell? And I think there's a number of different questions you can ask yourself that will make it easier for you to understand if it is the right time. You know, first of all, have you waited long enough to see how the land lies with things? Are there things going on currently that it would be wise for you to wait for an outcome on, you know, before you take any kind of metaphysical action? I think sometimes we can be quick to jump the gun and start to try and put something into place when we haven't really let the ride stop for long enough to understand what is going on. And obviously we can say that with anything until we're dead, because life just keeps going on and on and on, and things keep happening and happening. But you know what I mean when you're in a situation where there are some variables that are still taking shape, there are some things that are eking themselves out, and it's not yet possible to understand what might happen in the next week or the next couple of weeks. You know, you just get that feeling that the dust has not settled on something yet, and you might need to just allow things to take shape a little bit more before you know what the spell would even be for, because you just don't, the ride hasn't stopped yet, if that makes sense. So sometimes it's useful to think about that. It's useful to think about whether you really know what you want from the spell. Is it genuinely the case that you are sure of what it is that you desire, what it is that you need? It's also really useful to think about whether or not you are in the right frame of mind. I think frame of mind, of course, has got a lot to do with it, because the mind is the witch's tool. So I feel like, in a way, if you are not in the right frame of mind, for instance, if you are just feeling incredibly aggrieved or very, very angry, or your mood is incredibly unpredictable and it's like just jumping all over the place, whether it's due to you being in a certain place with with a mental health issue, whether it's emotional well-being stuff, whether you're going through heartbreak or bereavement or loss, and the healing journey is very rough at that point in time, it may not always be the best time to cast a spell. Again, your mileage is going to vary on this, and it's going to vary from situation to situation, but there are some times where your head is not going to be in the game enough, or you're not going to be bringing the right energy to it to be able to send your intention outwards in the way that you most want to. So I think that's something that can be useful to ask yourself. You can also ask yourself if you are in the right time in the lunar phase, or if the astrology looks how you want it to look. Do you have at the current time the different tools that you want? Do you have an environment that is going to be conducive to you performing the spell? And if any of those things are a concern for you, and you know that you can wait until you're in a better situation, or you feel like, it's going to be more advantageous, then obviously wait. Obviously do wait. And like I said earlier about the spontaneous spellcraft thing, there are situations where something just will come upon you. If you are someone who allows yourself to do non-scripted spontaneous spellcraft, something will just come upon you from time to time, and you will just start speaking, and it's like something is moving through you, right? And it will just happen. But if you feel like you are wanting to perform a spell where you do choose the appropriate time and you do want to plan for it, then obviously let yourself avoid being in a situation where you're forcing yourself to do the spell at a time that's not going to be advantageous. I think those are some key considerations I would mention when thinking about whether or not it's the right time to do a spell. Obviously, only you can really know that. There are people that consult with elders in their covens, for example, or people online to try to find out, is it the right time? But for me, I have to sign off on every decision I make, and I may seek input from time to time on things from other witches or whatever, but in the end I sign off on everything that I do. I'm not just gonna sort of blindly be led by somebody who tells me it's not the right time. I have to also feel like, yeah, I agree with you on that. I also get asked quite a few questions about sacred space and whether or not there is a need for drawing out sacred space and having that protective barrier. I think obviously there can be no hard and fast conclusion on that, but there is certainly a consensus that it is valuable to carve out some kind of sacred space to create some sense of what is within, where the spellcraft is going on, where the working is taking place, and what is without, where we are not where we are not physically and where we are not focused on energetically. And that is for a few reasons, and those reasons are going to be more significant or less so for different people. We talk about energetic hygiene, magical hygiene, making sure that we are moving anything aside that is not advantageous for the spell, that is not for our highest good. So we're getting rid of old, funky, stale energy, other people's crap, anything from the environment or the room that might be floating around, energetically speaking, that we don't want around, so that we can make sure that we are in, let's say, an energetically or metaphysically clean environment for the spellcraft to take place. I think that's very important, mostly on a psychological level. I think the belief that I have in my ability to forge a protective barrier whilst doing that kind of metaphysical work certainly strengthens the power of that working. And also just gives me a great feeling of calm and release and a wonderful feeling of well-being. Sacred space has always been for me like the womb. It's just quiet in there. I'm in my amniotic fluid, and it's like a space where I feel like I can just really just take the tension out and shrug it all out and sort of roll my neck and feel like I can have a good cry if I want to, and I can scribble if I'm journaling in there. I don't feel weird about saying words out loud or anything like that, or having spiritual experiences that I may otherwise feel a little weird or uncertain about. So, for me, it's very powerful. Now, if it's not powerful for you, obviously, all power to you to not do it, right? But can there be really anything other than a consensus to tell us what's what with forging that protective barrier? No, not necessarily. I would say that it's important for us to be able to create sacred space in a way that feels right for us. There's so many books that talk about taking your wand and actually visualizing yourself cutting out the space around you with the white light going along, and then you're actually in this protective like dome or circle or whatever. I think there's lots of people that don't vibe with that, either because they don't own a wand and they don't want to use their finger or their hand or whatever, or it just doesn't feel right for them. Maybe their open eye visualization skills are not strong enough to carry that out. Maybe they just feel like it's not clicking for them, and that's fine. There's so many different ways that you can do it, and I've talked in previous videos about some of the ways that I've managed to do it and had success with it. One way is to actually sort of gather up a big ball of energy and potency inside of me and just keep rolling it and moving it and adding to it and building to it until it feels like quite an exciting molecular tension, and then I just pop it out like a bubble, like, you know. That feels really powerful and actually can be really energizing and really like, wow, I'm awake now. It's like taking a Pro Plus or something. It's cool. The way that I do it at the moment, and have done it for quite some time now, is to use stones that I collected from a waterfall in Wales that I went to, and I just really love laying the stones down. I whisper words of power over them and I place them down in a circle around me. That has been one of the most effective ways, and previously I've used crystals for that as well. Some people use candles, but for some that might be a little dangerous, because of course you do have your back to some of the candles, so be careful of the fire, darling, you know, because fire can be very hazardous. But I should know, I'm a Sagittarius. But, you know, there's different ways of doing it. Don't feel like you have to go around and draw the white light. There's so many different ways of doing it. And I feel like the way that I sometimes do sort of like a little protection ritual before I leave the home, for instance, can be also a way to create sacred space. Because if you think about it, when you're doing sort of a protection ritual, like you're walking through consecrated protection incense, or you're saying words of power over yourself and visualizing yourself being protected before you leave the home, I think those things also can be a form of creating sacred space, because you're creating sacred space around your aura. You're not necessarily going to do a working in it, you're just going to go to work in it or whatever, do what you got to do, but you're still creating sacred space at the end of the day. So I feel like there can be an overlap, and I have quite a number of ways that I tend to do protection rituals before I leave the home and stuff, and I like to bring those ideas from those protection rituals into the proceedings. I think if people aren't sure where they fall when it comes to shielding, like energetic protection and, you know, forging that sacred space, first of all, they should experiment. They should figure out if they actually feel just as potent and just as comfortable without the forging of that sacred barrier. And if not, then obviously forge that sacred barrier naturally. And I think also it's about knowing that you can do your own thing. And I know this is just so much of my message, and it's on and on with this message of sovereignty and autonomy and being individual and doing your own thing. But that's just, I'm never going to stop talking about it, because it's what I'm into, it's what I believe, and it's how I think people can go the distance with witchcraft and keep being witches year after year, and keep making it something even more and more valuable to themselves, is by knowing that they can take certain things, certain ideas that have been put out there that people talk about, but they can make them their own. You can find stuff that really works for you. Like for me, when I was collecting those stones from the waterfall in Wales, that was a really magical, sacred time for me. I was there with some people, some women who were the closest, who were and still are the closest women to me. It was a really, really important time. It was very, very beautiful. It was a gorgeous day. I took a little video of it on Instagram and put it on Instagram because it was so gorgeous. I felt like I had to share it with my audience as well. And it was just such an amazing day. And I had this very strong instinct to collect these pebbles that were, these flat pebbles that were, you know, in the water at the foot of the waterfall. And it never occurred to me at the time that I would use them to mark out sacred space. But that's what they've become used for, and they live in my altar drawer, and that's what I use them for. So yeah, I think for me it's something that is very effective, and I know that without doing that spellcraft, you know, when I sit down spellcraft, like sit down, plan it out, do it, you know, like the moon is how I need it to be, you know, I've got my correspondences, that kind of spellcraft, I feel like it is heightened by having sacred space drawn out. And I definitely am not interested in being dogmatic about whether or not witches do or do not do that themselves. What I am interested in saying is that if you really feel like you have the ability to forge that metaphysical barrier, and without it, you are left somehow vulnerable. Either your spell is left vulnerable to being corrupted or you know, poisoned by something, or you are left vulnerable in some way because you are you know, open more metaphysically speaking or energetically speaking, and you don't want to catch something that might not be nice, then close that shit up, draw that sacred space, but do it in a way that's exciting for you and feels fizzy for you. The other thing I would say that I've learned about decent spellcraft, performing powerful workings, is looking at my eating, my sleeping and my hydration, that kind of thing, just checking in with whether or not I'm actually physically in the position to be able to carry out a spell. Now with the quick and dirty stuff, I check in with that as well, you know, because normally with the quick and dirty stuff, I know I feel great because I feel potent enough in that moment to just be like, this is the will of the witch's heart, therein let it be so. Like, it's now, I'm doing it, I'm fucking doing it. So usually I do feel fizzy and hydrated and great, and probably I'm very well, you know, I've slept well, or I just feel like I'm in a position where there's lots of amazing buzzing energy around me, and I feel like I really could put this out to the universe like a fucking email, and I could really like get something from that. It's more with the sort of planned spellcraft that I want to do that I will really check in with, you know, how I'm feeling. And not only will I check in with, am I well rested enough for this? Have I eaten the right food before this? Much like I would for a gym session, I want to make sure I eat that banana. I want to make sure I've got that protein smoothie, whatever. I also feel like it's a chance for me to actually take action before I realise that I'm not in any fit state to perform the spell. You know, if the spell's really important to me, if I want to do something on the full moon, if I want to perform a spellcraft, a spell working on the full moon, and I've gotten the stuff together for it, I've written kind of what I want to do, I've got an order of business, but I'm actually burning the candle at both ends, I'm not being very kind to myself, I'm not getting enough sleep, that kind of thing, then I want to check in with that. I want to make sure that I'm doing what I need to do to be able to be available to my working when the full moon comes. I don't want to ignore my physical and mental needs and then say, oh, tough shit, you know, I can't do the spell now because I'm not rested, I haven't been taking care of myself, I haven't eaten well today, whatever. I want to make sure that I take some preventative measures and I'm proactive about being able to perform the working when I plan to do it. I want to make sure that if I'm not feeling quite good enough, or I am tired or whatever, I'm not feeling great, that I actually grab some really good high energy food that I know that I need, that I've been missing out on or whatever. Obviously, one thing that it's very common for witches to do is to reschedule a spell working if they are hit by illness at a certain point, because it's like, you know, they realise that they are very run down, they have caught a bug and they're like puking, or there's a temperature, or there's whatever. It's not the best time to be doing it, is it? So obviously you're going to be of the belief that, like, yeah, okay, it's unfortunate, I can't do it when I plan to do it, or I can't do it imminently, but I do need to focus on getting my energy back where it needs to be and feeling well, and then I will establish next what is going to happen in terms of this spell. Am I still going to do it? Is it still going to, you know, when can I reschedule it for, or whatever? And I think that's fair, because sometimes physically we just cannot sort of do what we need to do to like raise energy, which is something I'll talk about in a second, and actually sort of give ourselves to this more structured, scripted spellcraft. As I'm talking about this, I'm kind of wanting to get into the dialogue around whether or not spellcraft is actually tiring. We do make a big thing out of the idea that you've got to be prepare for a spell. You've got to prepare energetically, you've got to prepare mentally, you've got to be, you know, reasonably connected to your sense of well-being. That varies from person to person, obviously, but there is this idea that spellcraft is laborious, that it's arduous in some way. And I suppose the question is, does it need to be? Does it need to be seen as arduous? Is that something that is actually a given? Is that something that is a consensus among us, that yes, spellcraft does take it out of you a bit? For me, it does vary from person to person, obviously, and it is about it is a little bit to do with where you are in your life, what you're doing the spell for. If you're doing a spell for wanting to keep your home because you are worried about paying the bills and you are concerned about where that journey might be headed, then obviously doing the spell is going to be incredibly empowering and restorative in one way, but it may also be draining. It might also take from you energetically because you are really placing your focus on one of the things that is the most worrying to you. Sorry, my necklaces were getting a bit bloody confused there. I was like, what are you doing? Yeah, so there could be very much an arduous process to that as well. Can we say that if a spell hasn't left us feeling at least a little bit pooped, that it hasn't done its job? I wouldn't say that. I would say spellcraft should be fun. It's not always going to be fun, but it, you know, it should have a fun element to it. It should be something that we also can enjoy doing. I think sometimes you're going to do a spell and you're going to feel tired afterwards, and sometimes you'll do a spell and you won't feel tired. It's not always a foregone conclusion that you're going to be bloody exhausted after you've done a spell. And I would say just be prepared for the fact that it's a possibility that you might feel drained physically and mentally after performing spellcraft. I wouldn't say that you should go in with an attitude of it being a foregone conclusion, but definitely tell yourself it's a possibility and that you must therefore prepare to enter the act of performing the spell in as good shape as you possibly can. So, you know, rather than saying to yourself, spellcraft is always exhausting, I'm always going to feel pooped after I do a spell, it does take a lot out of me, I can barely do anything else all day. Rather than saying that to yourself, or rather than reading that on websites or in books and thinking, oh, spellcraft should be arduous and I should feel tired afterwards, what I would say instead is accept that it's a possibility that that may sometimes be the case, and therefore make sure that you are hydrated, that you've eaten as well as you can, that you've done what you need to do to get yourself into the correct headspace, whether that's meditation, whether that's making sure that the physical space looks how you want it to look and you've done a bit of cleaning or decluttering, whatever the case may be, that you've slept decently, whatever it is, that you've taken care of any ailments that you need to take care of that maybe you haven't treated for a couple of days if you're feeling run down or tired. Do what you've got to do for yourself to put yourself in the best frame of mind and have the most physical fortitude to be able to do the spell. So I think that kind of, that's a better idea than telling yourself like, oh, spellcraft is always tiring, or spellcraft is something that naturally should be arduous to me and it is going to take it out of me. Not necessarily. Sometimes I felt quite buzzed after performing a spell, and I go on to have really a rather productive day in other areas of my life. Sometimes it's really taken a lot out of me, either because the theme and the focus of the spell is quite high intensity emotionally for me, it's difficult for me to think about, it's difficult for me to go there with the subject matter of the spell, and sometimes just because I really put my all into it, I didn't realise there was going to be so much emotion or desire attached to it, and I almost like, you know, I gave it everything I got, you know, I coughed it all up in like a mother load of intention and energy, and you know, I needed a bloody nap afterwards. So it really does depend. I think it's always best to just err on the side of caution and know that some spells are going to tire you out and some aren't. And I think that the narrative around spellcraft being tiring and us needing the energy for it and needing to prepare for it can convince some people that if they don't feel exhausted by the end of a spell, then it didn't work right. And that isn't the case. That really isn't the case. I think we need to get away from this sort of this idea that work should always be taxing and effort should always leave you feeling exhausted, and there's some pride in that and there's something good about that. I mean, I don't know if you'd call that something that's like a byproduct of late capitalism or whatever, but there's this idea that like, yeah, we should feel absolutely fucked at the end of it, and if we don't, then it wasn't valuable enough, and we should be proud of how utterly ravaged we feel mentally and physically by this thing that we've just done. I feel like, you know what, why can't something be effectual and also easy and enjoyable? You know, why can't it be both of those things? So you know, I mean, play with that. You might find that useful, you might not. I think some people have made up their minds about whether or not spellcraft is going to be tiring because of the spells they've done in the past and the effects that they've taken note of. I think for people coming into the craft who are new to spellcraft, I think sometimes they read or hear these things about how spellcraft, you know, is something you really need to prepare for, it can be tiring, and they take that as gospel. And I guess what I'm trying to say is don't take it as gospel, it's not necessarily gospel. So the next thing on the agenda I wanted to talk about was sort of where your spell is focused. So is it focused on external circumstances, or is it focused on internal alchemy, or is it focused on both? Certainly there can be a focus on both, and it's not a million miles away from the truth to say that I think a lot of the most effective spells do concern both and do focus on both. So in my video Casting for Cash, which I will leave down below for anybody who wants to watch it, I talked about spellcraft relating to the acquiring of money. And in that video, I talked about making the mental shift in my own head from focusing on the external circumstances, like I need to get more money in my bank and I need this money to materialize in my life in some fashion, to focusing on internal alchemy, so approaching my relationship with money, why I found that there was a pattern of me not feeling abundant or having money, why was I consistently going through these money issues, and it was about bringing the magic to that wound that obviously was existing inside the psyche. And obviously I did some self-development work and some shadow work around that as well, but I cast for the healing of that wound. I cast to have a different relationship with money. I didn't just cast for the cash, I casted also, you know, for my own outlook, for my own set of feelings around money. And it was a shift that took place. I would definitely recommend that people think about that shift in their own practice. Like if you've gotten to this point in the video and the things I'm saying have been in any way useful or making you rethink, I would definitely say also rethink about the degree to which you may only focus on external circumstances in your spellcraft. So if you only focus on wanting to bring that new job to you, or you only focus on, you know, wanting the family to be able to move to a different location or whatever, then you're going to be missing out on something that is so vital, I think, about spellcraft, which is that you can send it inward as well as outward. It's not always just about getting something to materialize, it's about understanding that there may be reasons why it has not materialized thus far, and you can focus on those reasons, which are usually problems or wounds or blind spots in your own psyche, and it's about directing the magic in there. For me, that is one of the things that's been really effective about spellcraft. It's just about recognizing that it's about internal alchemy and the internal life and what's going on in that inner terrain. And sometimes I may not cast for anything external whatsoever per se. I'm just casting for the healing, I'm casting for the realization, I'm casting for my eyes to be opened. I know this is something that might come across as fairly obvious to people, and it's certainly something that has done the rounds. None of these things I'm saying are necessarily part of a new conversation. But for me, I definitely recognise that spellcraft is not just about casting for something and then doing absolutely nothing within the physical consensus reality to show that I want that thing or that I'm working on that thing. And the classic example that I always use with my clients and my audience is the example of somebody who wants a new job and casts a spell to get a new job but isn't sending out resumes. You know, that's the classic example. I feel like we do need to be prepared to do our work in the real world. We do need to show up as well. We cannot just use magic as something that shows up for us. I think that we need to like get into alignment with what it is that we've sent out. Otherwise, it just doesn't make sense that we're going to be able to take delivery of what we sent out for. So if that makes any sense. And I guess, you know, this is really all about your belief structure. You could say that you have become practiced at performing the kind of magic where you wholeheartedly believe that all you need to do is send the spell out and you don't need to do anything. And that's part of your belief structure that you've created. If so, that's fine, that's awesome, and I'm glad that that's something that's working for you. But I feel like for me, when I think about that, when I think about trying to convince myself that I can cast for a date but never go on a dating site or talk to anybody at a bar, for example, I feel like that's just me bullshitting myself, because I don't really believe that's true. I do believe spellcraft is a little bit like a green smoothie before a run. It's like eating a, you know, something good for you, consuming something good for you before you do a workout. You still have to do the workout, you know, and you can cast a spell to help you to be brave enough to do the workout. But I feel like the workout still has to happen. Like, you still have to rock up and like demonstrate that you are. If this doesn't sound too new age, then demonstrate that you are a match for that which you desire, darling. I do like that language. I do. I'm a real fucking linguistic vulture. I take what I like from different paradigms, and I'm like, oh, I love that, I love that. And I do like that whole, you know, show that you're a match for that which you are trying to bring in. Like, I believe in that. And that's not to say that deep down I don't believe spellcraft works and I'm really just pulling my weight, because I might not be pulling that much of my weight. In the past, I've done spells to help me with things where I wasn't pulling my weight because my mental health was getting me down and I had procrastinated a lot, or I was finding that it was really difficult. And so the spellcraft was partly the green smoothie that I needed, because I was wounded at the time. I wasn't, you know, being able to kind of run the marathon full pelt, if you like, and the magic was there as a supplement to help me along. And that it's absolutely legitimate to use magic for that. I would not say that deep down I don't believe in magic and I'm really just doing what I need to do to get shit done. I do need magic as an aid. I do use spellcraft as a tool, but I don't believe it's the whole animal. Like, yeah, I definitely believe I need to be doing something, or at least attempting to do something as well, and not just hiding away and hoping that the magic takes shape as I want it to. People tend to have different ideas about how specific they ought to be about what it is that they want. Some people are incredibly specific when they do magical workings. They might create a mood board or a vision board that helps them to really tap into exactly what it is that they want or the feeling that they're after. They might describe very specifically what it is that they're calling in and what it is that they intend to manifest, and that might be something that really works for them. For me, as I've said before on the channel at various points, I may get specific about what I'm calling in, and but I will always put the little caveat on the end, this or whatever is in my highest good. And the reason I say that is because I do believe that there are probably that sometimes there are things that I need more or that I haven't thought of, and I want to make some space for that as well. So I always kind of add that caveat, like I call this in, or whatever else might be for my highest good. With some words to that effect, I do play around and change things. It's up to you what you want to do. You don't have to do that, you know. It's something that I do that helps me and might not necessarily feel fizzy for you. And again, you know, that it's all about figuring out what feels fizzy for you, right? So that's just something that I do. You might want to think about how specific you want to be. You might want to have a look at different workings that you've done where you were extremely pinpointed about exactly what you wanted and exactly how you wanted it to happen, versus workings where you were more open in the language that you used and the intention that you sent out, and then just have a look at which one actually produced the best results and which one you feel you want to do again and you feel called to do again. For some people it's very exciting to be as specific as possible, but you might not necessarily expect everything to happen specifically as you called it in, specifically as you said it in your incantation, but it might just be really creatively exciting and fizzy for you to experiment with being very pinpointed and being very descriptive. Whereas for other people it feels almost risky to be very, very pinpointed and very rigid about what you want, because you might be actually pushing away other possibilities that could be just as great that you haven't thought of. So it does depend on personality, I think, for sure. One thing I would say that's helped me a lot is that I feel myself, you know, like I feel my greatness, I feel my power, I feel like I'm invested with the ability to use a lot of different things within my resource base to help me to get where I want to be and be who I want to be, and magic is just one of those things. But I take my ability to use magic seriously. I feel that I have that power, I believe in it. If you don't feel that you actually can do it, you've got to start working on cultivating that belief in yourself. And it's really about the way that you talk to yourself, your self-talk. It's about locating the areas in your psyche which provide you with power. And that could be looking at archetypes to work with. It could be looking at different systems of magic that make you feel fizzy and excited. Whatever it is, I would really suggest that you make sure that you have cultivated a belief in your own ability, and that you really feel like you're not going to the universe cap in hand when you do magic. You're not begging, you're not asking for something and waiting with anticipation on the end of your seat. You are invested with power. It is you that is doing it. And whether you also call in beings to help you or to guide you, or you request their power, you still have to believe that you are invested with power. I think the moment that you surrender your power entirely to outside beings and forces to be at your to be at your beck and call or to aid you, there's probably an issue there. You know, you've got to really know that you are the one that is calling it in, and you have the ability to do that. I think that's really important. So ask yourself, I think, how much you've cultivated your belief in your skills and whether or not that's something you need to address. I think saying that has urged me to go on to remind you that you don't need tools and bits and bobs and knickknacks and all the shit and hashtag witchy aesthetic. You know, and I really feel like it's important to say that. Like, would you tell somebody that they can't be a powerful witch if they don't have a crystal ball, an athame, a wand, a collection of different colour candles with different correspondences, a little box full of herbs and bits and bobs that they ordered from the internet? Would you tell somebody that they couldn't have access to their power to perform witchcraft if they didn't have those things? I am sure that, like, hopefully 99.999% of the people listening to me right now would reply no, absolutely not. Hopefully it's 100% of people would say, I would never tell somebody witchcraft is an exclusive club where you've got to have these things to be able to make it work. You've got to have these objects, you've got to have been able to purchase these things to make the working everything it needs to be. So why would you tell yourself that? If you know in your heart of hearts that you wouldn't say that to someone else, why are you telling yourself that exact thing? It's so important to recognise when you are labouring under a belief that is just holding you down, stopping you from doing what you most want to do, stopping you from accessing your power, and it's not even a belief that you would expect anybody else to toil under. It's just something that you're probably using to sabotage yourself. You're probably just saying it to yourself so that you almost have an excuse to stay safe and to not know just exactly how much of a powerful being you could become if you really start to access these kinds of powers and do these kinds of workings. Think about the stuff you say to yourself that you'd never say to anyone else. And I know this is getting a little bit self-love September here, guys, so forgive me, but we need to be looking at our self-talk in all areas of life, and that includes when we are witching. That includes when we are planning spellcraft, performing spellcraft, etc. What are you saying to yourself that's really shitty, that's holding you back, that you wouldn't dream of saying to someone else? Would you disempower somebody by shutting the door in their face and saying witchcraft is an exclusive club where you've got to have these things to make it happen? You wouldn't say that, and you also don't fucking believe that. You don't believe that's true, so don't tell yourself that it's true for you as an individual. I want to talk a little bit about raising energy and creating focus. I'm just going to touch on it really quickly. Basically, with raising energy, there's a number of different ways to do it. I would definitely recommend that you look up inhibitory and excitatory ways of raising energy, and have a look at the spectrum of possibility that exists there. If you have not found a good way to raise energy, have a look at the phraseology raise energy and what it means. If you're new to spellcraft and you want to make sure that your first experiences are as effective as they can be, then you might want to look into how you're going to prepare in terms of raising the energy necessary to really make the spell pop. There are, different ways of doing it, and different ways kind of are suitable for different workings, and different ways vibe with different personality types. One of the things about raising energy is that it also raises focus. It gets us into that mindset that is required to really put us into spellcasting mode. And I think for me, focus is something that is very independent on the individual. And I want to stress this because I think it's very important that when we're talking about focus, we're only talking about what is going on with us. We don't set any kind of universal standard for what focus means. There are a lot of books that talk about the discipline, the mental discipline that is required to perform witchcraft, and there is talk about how you should be able to potentially meditate for long periods of time. You should be able to focus on a candle flame for a long period of time, and it's putting yourself through these tests and these sort of duration tests, etc., to train your mind. I think training your mind is something that is really helpful for any witch to do, but it varies from person to person, okay? If you're somebody that deals with ADHD, then you being able to sustain your focus for longer than you ordinarily would is powerful because it is significant. Don't tell yourself it's not powerful because it's not as good as this person who can meditate for a fucking hour or, you know, chant like 8,000 times or whatever. It's powerful for you because it's significant for you. It's stretched your ability. It's something that you know that you worked hard to achieve and that you did achieve, and that's exciting for you. And there's ways to do magic very effectively with that kind of issue that you might be grappling with. I think that sometimes focus is something that shifts as you go through life as well. You might have less focus while you're pregnant, for example, or in the early stages of new parenthood. You might have less focus for any number of different bloody reasons. If it is significant to you in terms of what it's meant to you to hold that focus and sustain that in order to do the working, then it's powerful. It's powerful on that basis. It's not powerful in comparison to what's going on to the left of you or to the right of you. I think I'm going to wrap things up here, but before I do, I want to talk about one more thing that I think makes my spellcraft as effective as it can be, and that is that it always aligns with my morals and my principles. The way that I think I should use magic and the way that I'm comfortable using magic is always a factor in the spells that I do and in the intention of those spells. Like, where is my intention going? What am I striving for? What am I trying to do? I personally would never cast any spell that was supposed to change anybody's mind about something so that it was more advantageous for me. That's something that is an ethical no-go area for me. Your mileage may vary, and that's absolutely fine. But for me, I don't cast magic to try to influence anybody else, their decisions, their actions, any of it. And even if I was butt-fuck crazy, arse backwards in love with someone, and they walked away from me and said they couldn't be with me anymore, and I was devastated, and it's happened to me in the past, I would not cast to try and change their mind. I would cast for my healing. I would cast to accelerate and facilitate my own belief in. I would cast to accelerate and facilitate my own healing and my empowerment, you know, bringing power to myself. I wouldn't cast for anything to do with them. Do I perform healing magic? Do I send out healing intention? Absolutely. And I feel personally that that is within my ethical remit. Again, your mileage may vary, and it's really about thinking about what is going on for you there. But in terms of like changing anyone's mind, trying to convince anybody of my point of view, trying to get somebody to act in alignment with my desires and come away from what might be their own desires, that's a no-go. And I think whenever I would start to blur that line, if I ever started trying to blur that line and do something that was really out of alignment with what I know in my heart feels right for me, that would not lead to effective spellcraft anyway, because there's something ungroovy in the woodshed about that, and I know it. So it's really about asking yourself too, is what I'm doing in alignment with what I feel is right? Am I encroaching on anyone in a way that feels wrong? Am I casting for something that I know is actually feeding my shadow? It's feeding my bad habits. It's a desire that comes from greed, or it comes from selfishness. Ask yourself that. It's not just about whether or not you're casting to convince somebody or shape somebody, or you know, turn them into your marionette puppet. Obviously look at that and make sure that you're not doing that if you don't want to be, and I would advise that you don't, but that's just me. You know, but also look at things like, are you casting for things that are right for you, that will bring you to the highest version of yourself, or are you casting for things that you know are just going to amp up your shadows and feed them instead of helping you to confront them? Honey bunnies, this has been an epic witchy ramble, rambling witch, witchy ramble, whatever. I can't even remember the fucking name of the series anymore because I am that bloody talked out. I've really enjoyed exploring these things with you, and I really hope at some stage of the game to be able to put a lot of them and a lot more similar kinds of ideas into a book. I know you guys ask me for a book all the time and ask me, when's it coming? When's this book coming? I really appreciate that support and that push. I really take my video content very seriously, obviously. I love my video content. I really enjoy putting it out, and I do think that it is a valuable resource. I don't think that I am in any way a lesser creator in any sense because I haven't published a book, but I hear what you're saying, and I love the support, and I love that you see me doing that and that you recognize that that's something that I could be great at. So let me work on it and let me figure out what I can do, guys, to birth something into the world. So much love until next time, baby cakes and witchy beings. Blessed be. Mwah.